Good evening, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to another edition of the Grand Boulevard Coalition. The Grand Boulevard Coalition is a coalition made up of sector partners in the Grand Boulevard community. Our mission is to focus on underage drinking and drugging in the community. Our sector partners are the Institute for Positive Living, Reverend Maurice Coverson, Recovery 2000, Miss Izetta Walton, Greater Harvest Missionary Baptist Church, Pastor Eric Thomas, Green Light Movement, Miss Roxanne Jackson, which is really an economic engine, a really great program. Centers for New Horizon, Miss Krista Hamilton, the Bronzeville Community Clubhouse, Mr. John Cook, CPS Liaison, Mr. Lafayette Ford, and our public engagement sector partner is the 3rd Ward Alderman Pat Dowell, who's doing a great job. And so let's just go right into the show. So we talked about some things, and last week, I guess just following up, I should mention this is a live show. This is actually our last show of this cycle. This is a live show, 312-738-1060, and our last show for this cycle. And so last week, we talked a lot about prevention, and it was heroin prevention week, and it's kind of still going on, and the impact of heroin use. And this is not just germane to the Grand Boulevard community, but we were talking about who was using heroin, number one, and who was selling it on the local level, if you will. And we were talking about the mayor's speech about violence. He gave this great, let me strike that. He gave a speech. I won't call it great, but he gave a historic speech at a college down the street from here, Malcolm X College, dealing with the issue of violence in our community. And, after the mayor's speech, 50 people were murdered since last week. Strike that. 50 people were shot since last week, 9 murdered. And so, and this is not necessarily me blaming the mayor or anyone. My point of giving those statistics and talking about the mayor's speech is that I think that, in essence, I felt, listening to it in my car as I left, I did not go over to attend, that the issue of economics and mental health was missing. And so I'll leave it right there. And so as we look at, the African American community, certainly even in the Grand Boulevard community, at one time, we had this inordinate and abundance amount of rogue businesses who were selling liquor and alcohol to young people. On every other street corner, you could go and buy marijuana, even though some of those pockets still exist by way of the selling of illegal narcotics. And I won't say there are too many bad liquor establishments in the community that tend to serve underage young people, thanks to the efforts of the Chicago Police Department and the initiatives from the Chicago Police Department and the city, where they hire young people to go into these establishments of seeking to buy liquor, trying to catch them. That's one. And then the community advocates in the community, like Grand Boulevard Coalition and some of our sector partners, like the Bronzeville Community Clubhouse, who've worked with young people in the community and residents to close down bad businesses, along with the aldermen in that area. So I will say, over the past 3 years, there have been a lot of businesses who sold cigarettes and liquor to underage youth have been closed. And that is directly the credit of community coalitions of residents, again, of your local elected officials and the Chicago Police Department working together to deal with the issue. in the community. So even though we've made great strides, there's still a lot of work to do. The issue of loose cigarettes, and if many of you don't know, since July, the age to purchase tobacco has been raised to 21, and you're supposed to show an ID, so it's no longer 18. You say what you will about it. I'm just telling you it's a law that was passed, and you have to be 21 years old to purchase tobacco products. And so, and that and in itself may have caused somewhat of an influx. I think so. There's a couple things at play, right? There is the taxes on cigarettes and the age requirement to purchase tobacco products, which is driving, in my opinion, this loose cigarette phenomenon. That's partly of it, right? The other side is just pure economics. I think that, and it's somewhat painful to see grown men, and I mean grown men. I'm talking about men, 35, 40, 50, 60 years old, hollering Lucy, 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 on corners, on street corners. I was on 22nd Street today, and this guy, he had to be about 60 years old. I'm just telling you. 22nd and Wabash, loose squares. It is something. It is really mind-boggling to me, and so. But again, that speaks to the issue of economics again, and people working in our community. And there's a saying that Chicago is the city that works. Well, who works is the larger question. When even as we talked about who's working is a larger question, and as we talked about youth violence and youth crime and crime in general, and the perpetrators of crime are getting much younger, and the shooters are getting much younger and becoming more female, by the way, as well. Is something that we also should talk about, and so. There was a study done by the University of Chicago. Number one, when you employ young people, the more young African Americans were engaged in employment, readily employment, and engaged in programming, job training programs, there was a pathway to employment. It was a deterrent to crime. You have 58% of African American youth unemployed. That is just deplorable. It is deplorable. It is awful. And any other adjective that you could find to describe that issue. We have to do better as a society, as a community, to embrace and cultivate our young people and lead them into employment. And then we look at, and I'm just going to jump for one moment. Let me say this, because it's quite disturbing. Even though I did not attend, I think I did. I took one class over at Chicago State, maybe some odd 7 years ago. I think it was a criminal justice course that I took. There was a brother who I respected, who was an attorney, who was teaching a criminal justice class, and I registered for it and took his class, and it was very insightful and intriguing. But Chicago State and that debacle, that fiasco, that abomination, and I will say the abomination that is taking place over on the South Side, where you have a majority African American board, and some of the board members, and and it's very painful. I don't understand. I don't understand. How does a school that sits in, it's the closest school to being an African American college, or just a historical black college that we will have in the Midwest, even though it's a state school. But it is for the most part, It has always been in the hands of African American educators. The board has been mostly 90% African American, though the contractors and who's making the money over there tells a different story. But the fact remains that every governor appoints boards of trustees. And, Quinn left several African-American Board of Trustee members over there. I think Bruce Rauner has appointed two. And without getting into the politics of it all, here's the deal. You guys spend, first of all, Bruce Rauner was threatening to close the school because there was no state budget. And it was all a hoopla about Chicago State closing. At that time, I think they had 27 to 3,000 students at the school. And this was last year, of course. We fought, we rallied, some folks raised money, and our late dear brother, who's no longer with us, Brother Quasi Ronald Harris, who had the African American Male Empowerment Center over there at the school, a resource center, where he was trying to cultivate relationships with the community and engage with African American males to get them into college, and did a great job of it up into the time of him making his transition. God rest his soul as he sleeps. But I got to tell you, a school that with all that prominence, with the prominent leadership that is serving on that board, to spend $150,000 of taxpayers' money to go find a CEO, strike that, to find a president of the school, hire him, and then 6 months later fire him, and then give him a $600,000 golden parachute. Lay off half the teachers, and I think there's something like 85 students that have registered in the school this year. I mean, it is a disgrace. And it's not, I laugh to keep from crying about what is happening there. And that's pretty much about all that's happening in our community for the lack of better terms. When you get right down to it, you say, well, Obadelli, what has this got to do with drug-free communities? Well, I think the last 3 weeks, and I've kind of been on a soapbox, basically because outside of me being the president of the board of the Grand Boulevard Coalition and the great work that we do, and my views and opinions, and I want to say these are the views and opinions of me, and does not reflect our coalition partners who work with young people in various capacities. But because I have this platform and this airwaves, I just feel like there's some things that need to be said, and that we need to have some candid conversation about what's happening in our community, past these social service issues or the social dynamic. And certainly drugs and underage drinking and alcohol plays a role, and marijuana, which is a gateway drug, plays a role in the demise of our young people. And certainly the Institute for Positive Living, Centers for New Horizon, Greater Harvest Missionary Baptist Church, Green Light Movement, and several of our coalition partners, Recovery 2000, and the work that they're doing to try to reach the lost at all costs in our communities as it relates to drugging and abuse of drugs, should I say, and HIV and AIDS and hepatitis C, education and awareness. We are all doing our part where we are. But the larger, the greater part of our community, there are young people and adults who are lost, who have not been engaged, who need some real comprehensive mental health services and help. And I say this, and as I said before, I do believe that, some of us suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm suffering from burnout, from activism. There's a stress disorder from just organizing and working in the community, and battle, as many of us would call it, battle fatigue, that we garner doing this work, right? And so you cannot do the work effectively in the community without raising some questions about without raising questions about responsibility from all individuals. So there's got to be, as I said before, the economic question, the mental health question, the accountability question, and that's accountability in the homes with parents. I know that much of the discussion has been, well, where are the fathers? And, I don't sit here in this chair saying that I'm the father of the year. I have 5 children, 2 ex-wives. So, hey, it's not that I'm just telling you that it is what it is. I'm being frank and transparent and honest with you. Now, with that being said, I try as much as possible to be involved with my children, try to give them the proper guidance as much as I can. I have a daughter that's away in college right now. I have another daughter that's a junior and in high school, a son that's in 8th grade. Another daughter who's a freshman, and my last daughter is in the 6th grade. So listen, you're having that many kids, you lose track. But my point is that we try as much as possible to be parents and to give guidance to our young people, right? So, I can, as I sit here and talk about drug-free communities, we can preach, don't get high, don't use drugs, don't drink alcohol, and if you until you're responsible and understand and know what you're doing. I mean, we can do all that, but working and trying to be a parent, trying to work in the community, I know that gets for even parent. I would say before I start kicking, there are some people who naturally don't understand how to be parents, and I'm glad that we have some models here with our parental coordinator with the Grand Boulevard Coalition, Mr. William Penn, who you've seen on this show several times, and his daughter, Paige Penn, who's one of our youth advocates. We are trying to engage and build more young people. As you've seen in previous years, as we've done this show, our young man, Michael Pryor. We'll have Perry Walton, who's the grandson of Izetta Walton and lives in the Grand Boulevard community, who will move into a role of playing a part of an advocate in the community to engage young people, because I believe that we need to have other young people talking to young people about their issues, and they think that we're old and we don't understand, and I get that. I mean, I was young once too, and felt like the adults were out of touch with where I was at that time in my thought process and thinking. So it will be very intriguing in the next production cycle. We will engage and have more young people involved and having conversation about what's happening in our community. But for you, the everyday listener, I think that, what can you, one person can't save the world. Well, Jesus did it with 12. You look at Martin Luther King. He certainly, all that he went through, his message, his speeches, the beatings, the threats, and even with his giving his life, today, a much civil right has been achieved. Now, I'm not here to argue about whether or not that had some great benefit. The bottom line is that today, 40 years later, 50 years later, African Americans, blacks, whatever you decide you want to be today, you can go downtown, you can go eat where you want to eat, you can live where you want to live for the most part and go where you want to go. Just, you probably can't drive where you want to drive. But anyway, that's a whole nother subject. My point is that even though we've made some great strides, we still have a long way to go. We are caught in this pendulum, and when you look at the level of violence that is happening in this city, and you've seen it being brought up in the presidential debates, a national stage. I don't want to give any kudos to the gentleman that's running for president for pointing out the obvious of what's happening in this city. But as I've talked about it for the last 3 weeks, it is a national story and a national disgrace for African Americans to have some of the most prominent leaders that we have in the nation that live in this city, and we have the level of violence that we have in our communities, that we have the level of economic deprivation that we have in our communities, and we have the level of economic, strike that, educational deprivation that we have in our community. Listen, the schools are probably going to be on strike next week. You know, next week the schools are going on strike. I'm telling you, and who's going to be mostly affected by that, right? So you have parents who go to work, or mothers, single mothers who go to work, who depend on the school to drop their children off, to get an education, but also they go to work. So who's going to stay home and watch the children or the child while mom has to go to work? All these things, you know, and listen, I support teachers. I think they good teachers. I think they should be paid starting salary of $70,000 or $80,000 a year, because in many cases teachers have to be their second mother, the mental health counselor, you know, the teacher, and so many other things of what they have to go through. So good teachers, I support them. I think they should be paid. You know, I support folks' right to organize. I see we have a caller, and we're going to be brief with the call because we're up against the clock. Caller, you on the air. Caller, you on the air.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
You're right. I've heard everything you said so far.
Okay.
Eating downtown, about this, on that. Why can't we build those buildings downtown? Your people, my people, we don't get a chance. It's all you see is the regulars out there building everything. We get 1% maybe of $100 million. What the heck is that? You know, and I'm tired of marketing. I'm tired of going downtown and marketing because that's all we ever do, and nothing's ever done. And I'm tired of that round annual getting on TV every 3 weeks and crying. About all the deaths in Chicago. Well, that's he done for 8 years. That's all he does is cry. He don't think nothing.
Yeah, well, listen.
One thing. Well, we got 1,000 officers coming in, supposedly, right? And some of those aren't going to even...
Well, we won't, you know what, caller, I got to tell you, and I'm sorry to talk over you. I apologize, but we up against the clock, and thank you for your call. Listen, I would agree with you to an extent. Let me just say this. We won't police our way out of this issue. And I think the mayor knows that. Superintendent Johnson knows that. We have to roll up our sleeves, as I have, and all of you out there, we have to roll up our sleeves. We have to hold our elected officials accountable. We got to hold our parents accountable. We have to hold the educational system accountable. But we have an economic crisis in the African American community. We need jobs. Then we need mental health services. We need to repair the damage that have been done. You know, and I will say this: I would cry too. I would be crying talking about it. I mean, you know, it pains me. I mean, you had a 14-year-old child that was burned to death, beaten, shot, and burned. I mean, tortured and threw in a garbage can on the west side. By the way, the heroin. Let me just say this because I'll start getting mad. The point of the matter is, I'm not going to totally blame the mayor for listen, he's been the mayor for 8 years. You've got another mayor here for 22 years that sold off everything, and the pensions are out of whack. So we got some real problems. But I hear you. And it's time to wrap up. Hey, listen, it's been a great 13 weeks. Thanks to CAN TV. Thanks to Miss Aviance Richards, who's been working our phone board over there and is a part of the Grand Boulevard Coalition staff. Thanks to AmeriCorps Vista. Thanks to Ms. Laurel Taylor Dudley, all of our coalition partners at GBC and GPPS. And mostly of all, thank you, the viewers, for tuning in, watching. There's a lot that goes into putting these shows together. And I will say the last 3 weeks, I've kind of moved off topic to deal with some community issues, because that's who I am at the end of the day. Outside of the Grand Boulevard Coalition, I live in the Grand Boulevard community. I'm a father, but I'm a citizen. And your heart should bleed for what's going on in our great city. Until now, between now and next year, I have a safe fall, and hopefully by the time I see you in January, the Cubs would have won the World Series. Between now and then, God bless. Take care.